Before we speak why cities choosing death over facing Genghis Khan, we must understand something important. No army in history conquered land faster than the Mongols, but no empire in history conquered minds the way they did. When people heard that the Mongols were coming, many cities collapsed before the first arrow was fired. Gates were opened. Governors fled. Armies deserted. Civilians escaped into deserts and mountains. In rare and extreme cases, defenders chose death rather than capture. This did not happen because Genghis Khan ordered cities to commit suicide. It happened because fear traveled faster than his soldiers. In the early 13th century, most civilizations believed walls meant safety. Fortresses had protected cities for thousands of years. Siege warfare was slow. Negotiations were common. Prisoners were ransomed. Even brutal empires followed certain customs of war. Then, the Mongols arrived. They did not fight like anyone else. Genghis Khan, born as Temujin on the Mongolian steppe, did not inherit an empire. He built it from nothing. His childhood was shaped by hunger, betrayal, and survival. His father was poisoned by rival tribes. His family was abandoned and left without protection. Temujin learned early that weakness meant death, and loyalty meant survival. These experiences shaped the man he would become. When he united the Mongol tribes, he did not rule through noble bloodlines or royal ancestry. He created a system based on merit. Soldiers were promoted because of skill, courage, and loyalty. Desertion meant execution. Disobedience meant punishment. Loyalty meant reward and honor. This created an army that was disciplined, unified, and terrifyingly efficient. Each Mongol soldier owned multiple horses. When one horse tired, another was used. This allowed Mongol armies to travel enormous distances without stopping. They carried dried meat and fermented milk, allowing them to survive without supply lines. They communicated through signal flags, drums, and mounted messengers who could cross entire regions in days. They attacked from multiple directions. They used fake retreats to trap enemies. They coordinated movements with precision. But speed and tactics were not their most powerful weapons. Fear was. Genghis Khan understood a brutal truth of warfare. If one city was destroyed completely, 10 cities would surrender without resistance. So the Mongols carefully built a reputation that spread like wildfire. When they approached a city, they offered a clear choice: surrender immediately, open the gates, provide supplies, pay tribute. If the city obeyed, leaders were often spared. Trade resumed. Local administrators were sometimes kept in power. Life continued under Mongol rule with heavy taxation but relative stability. But if a city resisted, the punishment was absolute. When Mongol forces captured resistant cities, they killed large portions of the population. Skilled craftsmen were deported across the empire to build Mongol cities and weapons. Others were enslaved. Entire urban centers were erased from maps. Skulls were stacked into towers as warnings. These acts were not random cruelty. They were calculated psychological warfare. They were meant to be seen, meant to be remembered, meant to be feared, and the world remembered. When the Mongols destroyed Nishapur in Persia in 1221, after the death of a Mongol general, Persian chroniclers described massive civilian slaughter. When Bukhara and Samarkand fell, once great cultural centers collapsed. When Baghdad was captured in 1258 by Hulagu Khan, a grandson of Genghis Khan, the Abbasid Caliphate effectively ended. Libraries were destroyed. Irrigation systems collapsed. The intellectual heart of the Islamic world was shattered. These events did not remain local tragedies. Merchants carried stories along trade routes. Refugees carried trauma across borders. Travelers told horrifying tales in marketplaces. Even captured prisoners were sometimes intentionally released to spread terror. The Mongols did not need written propaganda. Their reputation became their weapon. By the time Mongol armies approached new regions, many cities already knew what resistance meant. Psychological collapse often occurred before physical battle. Governors fled with treasury gold. Military commanders abandoned their posts. Soldiers deserted. Civilians escaped into deserts, forests, and mountains. Some cities even destroyed their own food supplies to prevent Mongol capture, unintentionally causing famine inside their own walls. In rare but documented cases, defenders chose death rather than capture. Not because the Mongols demanded suicide, but because people feared what capture meant. In medieval warfare, captivity was rarely mercy. Slavery was common. Women were taken as war captives. Children were separated from families and raised in foreign lands. Men were forced into labor, conscription, or execution. Skilled workers were deported thousands of kilometers away to serve the Mongol Empire. For many people, especially nobles, warriors, and religious leaders, death was considered preferable to humiliation, enslavement, or loss of honor. Persian chroniclers recorded nobles killing their families before Mongol entry to avoid capture. During later Mongol invasions of China, some defenders burned themselves inside fortresses rather than surrender. These were not Mongol orders. They were human reactions to unbearable fear. Siege warfare made the situation even worse. When Mongols surrounded a city, they cut water supplies. They blocked food routes. They destroyed farmland around the walls. Disease spread quickly inside overcrowded cities. Dead bodies accumulated. Starvation weakened populations. Parents watched children die from hunger. Families fought over food. Social order collapsed. Sometimes chaos inside cities caused mass civilian death before Mongols even entered. This created the illusion of cities committing suicide, when the reality was humanitarian disaster caused by siege conditions and panic. Medieval historians often exaggerated numbers. Persian and Arab chroniclers sometimes reported millions killed when population sizes make that impossible. But exaggeration reflected emotional trauma more than statistics. Writers described horror the only way they knew how. And these dramatic accounts spread fear even faster. Genghis Khan understood something few rulers before him truly understood. War was not only fought with weapons, it was fought with reputation. He intentionally spared cities that surrendered early to reinforce the idea that obedience meant survival. He destroyed resistant cities to reinforce the cost of defiance. This created a psychological equation in the minds of enemy populations. Surrender meant life. Resistance meant destruction. Fear did the rest. Here is the paradox of Genghis Khan. He was ruthless in war, but he was not chaotic. He protected merchants. He promoted religious tolerance across the empire. He encouraged trade routes that later formed the foundation of the Silk Road network. He banned torture within Mongol society and enforced strict laws among his people. His terror was selective, used strategically, not randomly. Cities did not fall because Mongol armies were everywhere at once. They fell because fear arrived first. The myth of entire cities committing suicide exists because history often simplifies complex human behavior into dramatic phrases. In reality, what happened was far more complex and tragic. Some people fled and died in deserts. Some defenders chose death over capture. Some cities collapsed under starvation. Some populations surrendered without resistance. Some chroniclers exaggerated destruction. But the underlying truth remains. Genghis Khan did not just conquer territory. He conquered psychology. He turned reputation into a weapon. He made surrender cheaper than resistance. He made fear travel faster than armies, and that is why some cities chose death instead of facing him. Not because they wanted to die, but because they believed survival, dignity, freedom, and identity were already lost. That is the true story behind the terror of Genghis Khan. Not a story of madness, but a story of how fear, strategy, and reputation reshaped warfare forever. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, subscribe for more untold stories hidden behind traditions. Because history isn't just about the past. It's about understanding who we are today.